All right, hey guys, welcome to chapter 6. We're looking at the nature of genes, and today we are going to look at 6.1 chromosomes. Now, this chapter is going to be split into two parts. One, we're going to look at chromosomes, and then the other one, we'll look at meiosis. So let's start with chromosomes. So chromosomes are a structure that contains genetic information in the form of a DNA strand. Generally, when you look at a chromosome, it has one strand of DNA that's just been kind of really well packed together. The DNA is wrapped into these proteins called histones, and these are the histones that are there. The histones are then coiled together to form what we call a nucleosome, and coils of nucleosomes end up forming the chromosome. Okay. Now, when you look at the structure of a single chromosome, there are going to be features in this chromosome that are going to be the same no matter which chromosome you look at. Okay. Every chromosome generally has two identical chromatids, particularly when it is undergoing DNA replication. Now, of the chromosome, you're going to find something in the middle called a centromere, which is a constricted point, which forms kind of the basis of that X shape. That is very classic of the chromosome. And anything above the X, that's called the P arm. The P arm is usually the shorter arm, although some P arms are about the same length as the bottom one, which is what we call the Q arm, okay, which is the long arm structure, okay? And the position of certain features on the chromosome can be, relative to whether it is located on the P arm or the Q arm there, okay? In terms of size, chromosome size is usually determined by the number of base pairs that it has. That's the A, T, G, C combinations that you see in each of those rungs in the DNA ladder. And it ranges from about 50 million from the smallest ones to about 300 million base pairs from the largest chromosome. Chromosome 1 is usually the largest, and it usually gets smaller and smaller as you go further down in the chromosome number. The only exception to this is the X and the Y chromosomes, which are a little bit different in size from the other sets, okay? If you look at this particular graph here, this graph shows all of the chromosome sets within an individual, which is what we call a karyotype. And you can see that chromosome 1 over here and chromosome 2 over here are they're roughly about the same size. And then as you make your way across the numbers, it gets smaller and smaller, the X chromosome being the exception and the Y being just a little bit bigger than the set of chromosomes 21 and 22 pairs, okay? Now, when you look at the chromosomes, the genes that are located on the chromosomes are usually spaced apart by a section called the spacer, and the genes are all different sizes. Some genes are really small and only contain a certain number of base pairs, and then some genes are really big and run for even longer stretches. But either way, they're separated kind of like, chapters being separated by certain pages, right? The base pairs form the genes in the DNA sequence. And those spaces are going to be separated, separating each gene, and each gene occupies this particular location, which is what we call the gene locus or the gene loci for plural, okay? Chromosome number usually varies within a species. So when you are looking at different species, you're going to find different numbers. So for example, nematode worms have 2. Humans, we have 46 chromosomes over here. Platypus has 52. Some plants can have, like for example, ferns can have 1,260, and then other things as well can have different numbers as well. So by now you can probably understand that there's no correlation between number of chromosomes and intelligence. It simply gives you the different types of proteins and molecules being produced by the genes, okay? Not all the cells in the chromosome will have the same number as well. So in a typical organism, you have two types of cells. You've got what we call somatic cells, and somatic cells are basically anything that's not a sex cells, and they will have a complete set of chromosomes, whereas the sex cells, the sperm and the egg, are what we call gametes. And so somatic cells are what we call diploid in number, and they have a 2n notation, whereas gametes are haploid in number, and they have a singular n in notation. Now that n, that's represents the ploidy level, which is the number of chromosome sets. If something is diploid, it means there are 2 sets of it. Then the reason for that is because you get 1 set from each of your parents. Whereas if you are talking about a haploid number, you are talking about 1 sex, and that 1 sex depends on the sex of the organism itself, okay? Now, if you were to imagine this, a sperm and an egg would be haploid because they contain half the number of expected chromosomes. That's because when you put the sperm and the egg together, you get a full set, okay? Now, when you number the chromosomes off, you're also going to find that of the 46 human chromosomes that we have, 22 of them are actually matching pairs. So 44 out of 46 chromosomes are matched in pairs, and then you have 2 sex chromosomes, okay? So the matching pairs of chromosomes are what we call homologous chromosomes. They are called homologous because you have one homologue from your mum and one homologue from your dad, and they contain the same genes but different alleles of the genes, okay? And so the allele is the variation of the gene. So for example, if the gene was flower color, the allele for a particular gene would be blue flower color. So you can see there, gene is like the general category, allele is the specific trait, right? So here you go, you've got 3 alleles possible here. You've got a violet, a pink, and maybe a purple color, right? And so you can see there are 3 alleles, but the same gene, which is flower color, right? Here is an example of homologous and non-homologous chromosomes. So if you have chromosome number 1 that's here, and then this is chromosome number 2, you would say that chromosome 1 and 2 are homologous. And you can see there that here are 2 types of genes. This is gene A and this is gene B. And between gene A, you've got capital A. But between gene B, you've got capital B and lowercase b. So, for example, if gene B was flower color, this could be saying make purple color, and this one could say make pink color. We don't know. You were just speculating right now, right? And so you've got same genes, but different alleles on homologous chromosomes. Now, if you were to take chromosome number 1 and, sorry, that was my bad. If you were to take chromosome 1 and match it with chromosome number 10, for example, you're going to find different genes. Gene A does not match with gene C, and B does not match with gene D. So you've got completely different genes, and these are considered as non-homologous chromosomes. Now, during DNA replication, you're going to get a gene multiply the number of chromosomes it has, and so you've got 2 chromosomes that are exactly the same. Each one is called a sister chromatid, and you've got same genes and the same alleles, which are held together at that particular centromere. And so these are sister chromatids of the same chromosomes. Okay, so don't get them confused between homologous chromosomes and sister chromatids. This is particularly at DNA replication, whereas this is applies at all times. Okay. Okay, aside from your normal chromosomes, you also have sex chromosomes. These chromosomes determine the sex of an organism, and in different animals and organisms, you get different types of sex chromosomes. In humans, most mammals, and even fruit flies, you have an XXXY system, okay? And so XX is for females. Because they are the same, we call that homogametic. Homo meaning same, and then gametic is referring to the gametes or the sex. XY is for males in humans, and that's heterogametic, right? Now, that's not the only sex determination system we have. And you have a ZW and also a ZZ system for birds, for example, and butterflies and things like strawberries. And then you've also got what we call an XO system as well, where males have a missing X chromosome instead, right? And then you've got some weird and wacky things like environmental sex determination, where attributes of the environment, like for example, temperature, can determine whether an organism becomes a male or a female. Like for example, in reptiles and like turtles and crocodiles, if it's too cold, it generally forms males, and I think if it's too warm, it forms females. Right. Now, one thing to note about human sex chromosomes, the presence of the Y chromosome is what determines the sex of an individual, right? So when you see the Y, that tells you that it's a male. When there is no Y, it indicates that it is a female, okay? And if you were to match the possibilities there, right? If an individual male was to produce sperm, half the sperm would have the X chromosome in it, and the other half would have the Y chromosome, because that part splits into 2. And then whereas females will have X for one and X for the other, which is the same. And so when you meet them together, you get half of the time a female, which is XX, and half of the time XY, which gives you a male. Okay, so let's quickly wrap it up and put it together. So humans have 46 chromosomes in a typical body cell, which is what we call a somatic cell. of those body cells, you have 22 pairs of autosomes, and they come as homologous chromosomes, and then 2 sex chromosomes, either XX or XY, and we call that a diploid number. Okay, when these humans then produce gametes or sex cells, either the sperm or the egg, you have 23 single chromosomes, which is 22 autosomes and an X, or 22 autosomes and a Y, and that is what we call a haploid number. And that is, the reason for that is because when you join the two gametes together in a process called fertilization, you form a new organism, okay? And then from there, mitosis and mitotic division then grows the organism to form the individual adults all over again. Okay, that's pretty much it for this particular video, and I'll catch you guys next time for meiosis.